Hello there, YouTube. Last time I said I was gonna film a couple of more videos. I did film 2 and then I deleted them both. Thought they do not reflect my intention, or I wasn't. Anyways, bottom line, never watch the videos before you upload them. Makes you want to delete them instantly. Anyways, today's talk gonna be a bit long, I think. It will drag. But me being Russian and based in Russia, etc., I sort of feel the need to address this. As you may know, I'm gonna look at my iPad. The housekeeping, my Dagnar half-church, semi-church warden with Peterson Wild Atlantic. What I'm gonna talk about is the Chernobyl miniseries by HBO. That is, I think, the current rage on the TV series market, so to speak. It's breaking records. I think it has higher ratings than Breaking Bad, than Game of Thrones, etc. And because it naturally, for those of you living under a rock, it deals with the most catastrophic nuclear power related disaster in the history of the USSR and the human race. And because it's set in the 80s USSR, it also causes quite a stir in the Russian media as of now. In 1986, I was 2 years old. So it was always somewhere news about the Chernobyl disaster were circulating throughout my childhood. And then suddenly we had what was called glasnost, and suddenly everybody could talk whatever they please, film whatever they please. And it was the beginning of sensationalism and conspiracy theories in Russia, etc. So naturally, the disaster of such proportions attracted enormous amount of attention from all kinds of crazy people. And because it was fashionable to say shit about the Soviet Union at the time, there were many quote-unquote truths revealed about the Chernobyl disaster, you know, all kinds of stuff. I've heard rumors, and it was rumors, if you can say rumors about something that was on TV. It was said that the whole disaster was an intentional act of sabotage. It was told that the whole, it was called the liquidation process, you know, the decontamination, etc. All this was performed by either prisoners or conscripts that were, you know, forced into working on on site at gunpoint, etc., etc. You know, ridiculous amounts of ridiculous shit. And the underlying idea was that horrible Soviet Union was poisoning its people and killing its people, basically. But now everything swings backwards, and as of now it is very unfashionable to say shit about the state, and this series that basically deals with, well, criticizes, let me put it that way, criticizes the Soviet system, is met with much negativity from, you know, the official media sources, you know, the state-owned TV channels, etc. Again, we hear some ridiculous stuff, like it was all paid by the CIA, it was all, the whole series is intended as a blow against our country, and the intention behind this series is to put a negative spin on the liquidation process, and to scare people, etc., etc., etc. I've even heard the bizarre theory that it was somehow related to the modern day situation in the Ukraine. So naturally, what everybody is saying in the comments section and here in the Russian kitchens is, if this series caused so much butthurt with the officials, it must be good. So I think the majority here are very pleased with the series, and I should have made this disclaimer earlier. I haven't watched it, and I think I won't. I don't think I'm able to stomach it. I watched the trailer. As far as I'm concerned, everything, every praise that was given to the depiction of the late Soviet era Russia is correct. It looks very authentic. With occasional, you know, fictional stuff like a little too much vodka, an AK-47 too many, something like that. But nothing too unreasonable, really, as far as I'm concerned. But for me, it's just too much, you know, too much gore. One of the arguments I've heard against the series is they're taking a stab at Russia. Why don't they make some film about their own disasters, like, you know, the disaster at Bhopal in India? That's amazing. How what's their idea of a screen adaptation of the Bhopal disaster will be, I wonder. Just an hour of gruesomeness, you know. Where's the... I'm not trying to downplay that particular disaster, but it's, in my opinion, unfilmable. Anyways, back to the topic. So I watched the trailer. I understood that I cannot take that much negativity and disturbing images, and I asked a friend of mine who is into, watching a film series or two. He said that it's amazing, and I trust his opinion. He says it's amazing, very disturbing. He said I've got goosebumps that big. And I thought to myself, that big? No, not my caliber. So I started reading, or rather I continued reading, because I was somewhat interested in the history of this disaster. But now I started to dig, and in the end I stumbled upon and watched, I think, the majority of clips that were filmed on site during the liquidation process that took, I think, whole spring and summer of 1986. Amazingly, they had camera crews on set, and they were filming the efforts and the procedures they were going through. And I stumbled upon a particular film. I'm gonna put a link in the description box below. One moment. And the more I watched this particular documentary, it's a short one, it's about 30 minutes, and I went to adjacent videos. The documentary is called Chernobyl 3828. The number being 3,828 is the number of people, or rather number of soldiers, I think, that were tasked with one of the most difficult tasks throughout the decontamination process. This particular task is just it's the one that is referenced, I think, the most when people are speaking about USSR not giving a fuck about human lives. Let me put it that way. I'm sorry, I'll have to go with a brief description for those. Maybe by the magic of hashtags, some young people will stumble upon this video, so just in case. By the way, if some young people are watching this, smoking is bad for you. So the brief gist. Chernobyl nuclear power plant was divided into several reactors. The reactor in question was number 4. It was called Energoblok 4, Energy Block 4. The basic idea behind the disaster itself is that that particular block exploded. Basically, the portion of the building exploded, and the reactor exploded. It was exposed, and all the contents of the reactor was sprayed outwards in the air in the form of particles, dust, smoke, etc. And also in the form of the debris that ranged from graphite to to the housings of the rods inside the reactor, all the internal components that was sprayed outward. And naturally, everything was contaminated, and the radiation levels were off the charts. So all this radioactive debris covered the roofs of the nearby, I think it was block 3. The debris also covered the exhaust pipe, the main exhaust pipe of the plant, which had several walkways and platforms at different levels. And when we are saying liquidator, the person who participated in the decontamination, well, the first image that comes to mind is this horrible picture of people removing this debris manually. You know, it's hard to imagine anything more brutal and fitting if you want to, you know, poke at the Soviets at the time. So as the small documentary suggests, it took almost 4,000 people to remove the debris from the roofs. And the central figure and narrator of this documentary, his name is Valery Starodumov, and he was I don't like the word here, but Valery Starodumov was the deputy head of the dosimetric reconnaissance unit. What does it mean? He was a scout. This unit was tasked with mapping the contaminated area. So before all the horrible things happened on roofs, scouts went there first, and they were mapping basically the roof, because the nature of the contamination was such that it would differ. You know, over here is one level of radiation. You take a couple of steps, and it's a whole another level. And they were basically mapping it, saying, well, this is a slow death from cancer and related diseases, and this here is basically instant kill. Horrible task, if you ask me, because you are going in, you're not a soldier who was just ordered to be on site. You know what this stuff is, and you know that it's lethal, and you know precisely how gruesome the death from acute radiation syndrome is. That's basically, by the way, that's the thing that most people are referencing, that when they say that all the liquidators died a horrible death. Yeah. Most of these people are referencing the really horrible fate of the first responders that were on site. Several the employees of the plant that were on shift at the time, and the firemen that arrived on site first. They had no idea about the nature of the accident, and they were exposed to horrendous amount of radiation, and they all, I think none of them lived more than a month after the exposure. and their end was gruesome, to say the least. If you want to know the details, go watch the series. It's depicted in graphic detail. One of the reasons I'm not watching it. But the job of the scouts was not exactly similar, because they knew what they were getting into. But they were, you know, the first on site. And the film depicts how the initial idea was to remove all the debris by using remote-controlled robots, etc., and how that idea failed because the nature of radiation contamination at site was such that first of all the electronics, all the circuitry inside the robots basically dissolved, and they became unusable very quickly. Some of them were calibrated wrong, partially because the Soviets, willingly or not, that's, you know, up to debate, supplied, for example, the German company that provided probably the most sophisticated robot with wrong numbers of the contamination level, and so he was calibrated with the wrong numbers in mind, and he basically shut down. But also the area itself was so difficult to navigate because of the debris and the pipe which had supports. So using anything but manual labor was almost not an option, and the clock was ticking. Because this whole area was, as far as I understand, one wind shift away from contaminating Kiev, for example, one of the major cities of the USSR. So I urge everyone to watch this small documentary. It's a great documentary filled with some pretty horrible imagery, really. As you see, you know, soldiers going in, doing their job, doing the task that was, you know, appointed to them. They wear sort of a makeshift armor made of lead, breastplates, plates that cover their heads, vital organs, to lessen the radiation poisoning. And this number 3,828 is this number is so huge because they had to take small shifts. So the horrible Soviets, who, as some people claim, wanted nothing but to kill huge amounts of people, their idea when the robots failed was basically to have a big team and rotate them. So each soldier was supposed to go out just for a minute, maybe even less than a minute and a half, so the level of exposure will be somewhat manageable. And so I watched this documentary, and there's a host of other videos with this guy who's still alive, basically watching different clips filmed on site and providing commentary. And I was amazed by, you know, throughout the 80s and the 90s, the common knowledge was that everybody died, and the whole this operation was a disaster and basically a human conveyor of killing Soviet people. And this guy is who had probably one of the most horrible jobs on site scouting the location. He's still alive, and the head of this division is still alive, and as far as I understand, half of the team, of the scout team, died as a result of radiation poisoning, etc. But he's still alive, and the general that was commanding the troops on site and who went to the roof first to oversee and to measure the level of exposure, he's still alive as well to this day. I'll tell you more. Another horrible episode of the Chernobyl disaster was 3 people going below the reactor core to drain the water that was below the core, because there was the risk that everything that remained in the core, all the remaining fuel, etc., it's called corianum, I think, don't quote me on that, there was a risk of it melting through, and if there's any liquid there, it will have and they were worried that another explosion will occur, that it will affect the other reactors, and everything, basically everything, all the installation goes as a big nuclear bomb. So I've seen many articles on the Russian media, in the Russian media, and many of those were translated into English, that 3 people volunteered. They literally donned their diving gear and they went below the core, knowing full well that they will be exposed and they will surely die. I think it's one of the more disturbing scenes in the mini-series. Well, the bad news is that they didn't volunteer. It was an urgent task at hand, and it was basically their shift, so they went in. The good news is that not only were they not killed and dead within the next couple of days, as the media claims, one of them died in 2005 from heart failure, no cancer as far as I know, and the other 2 are still alive to this day. One of them actually worked at the Chernobyl power plant. When it was operational. So the more I watched this, this documentary, all the clips, all the comments that Valery Starodumov provided, the more it dawned on me that everyone is lying. Everyone is lying and repeating other people's lies. So don't get me wrong, I'm sure the Soviet officials were lying or not telling the truth about the disaster. That's out of the question. I live in this country. I know what I'm talking about. But all the many of the people that are claiming that, oh, this is horrible, this is how the Soviets killed their own people, they are either they don't possess adequate knowledge, or they are flat out lying for the sake of, you know, sensationalism, etc. The more clips I watched, the more I realized that in the end maybe they really didn't have any choice. Because there was a big, I think, an hour-long clip of this guy answering viewers' comments, and one of the more, you know, popular ones was, why didn't you try to use robots again, or wait for the contamination level to decrease? And his answer was basically, we couldn't evacuate Kiev. Couldn't wait for the wind to shift, for this whole area to contaminate everything else, because at the time they were building what was called a shelter, or which is commonly now called the sarcophagus, basically this structure made out of steel and concrete covering the exposed core. So before they could finish this and seal the stuff off, they had to dump everything that was in the surrounding area back into the core and seal it. So that's when when the manual labor came into play. And don't get me wrong, it's horrible. I'm sure the HBO guys did a brilliant job about, you know, dramatizing it and showing it, all the tension, etc. But just seeing the clips filmed on site, you know, from the helicopter of people, 5 or 6 at the time, running up, picking the debris with shovels, or picking the graphite blocks this big, I think 30 to 40 kilograms of radioactive graphite, and picking them by hand and throwing them into the core, trying to throw as many as they could within the, you know, 90-second interval they were given before the siren goes and they have to run back, because that's as much as you know, human can, as much radiation as a human can stomach. That's horrible. This is dread, real dread. But my idea, the point I'm trying to make here is that, you know, you have to question everything. You know, in this day and age, you have to question everything. And, you know, whether you are against nuclear power, where you are pro-nuclear, I've seen an interesting video, by the way. I don't remember the guy. He's, I think, a physicist, and he was participating in one of the TED Talks, and the idea behind his speech was that all the beautiful, you know, projects with renewable energy, solar power, etc., turns out it doesn't work I'm gonna put a link in the box below. And his idea was, the basic gist was, you may think whatever you like, but nuclear power is here to stay, and there's really no other alternative. So that's it probably. I think I said everything I wanted. I'll put the links below. Whoever is watching the HBO series, or if someone is going to watch the HBO series following this video, having heard about it from me, thank you very much from the bottom of my heart, because I think this is probably the story that needs to be told. And, you know, Russians won't film it. There's no place for remembering this sort of story in the modern day Russia, unfortunately. I'm ashamed to say that, but that's the truth. Even Ukrainians managed to make a film about the Chernobyl disaster, a drama. It's called Moths, I think. Мотыльки in Russian. It literally means moths. Even Ukrainians managed to do that. We won't do that. I've heard rumors that someone was saying that we are gonna film our own series with blackjack and hookers. Just kidding. We're gonna film our own series, which will basically say that that the Chernobyl disaster was orchestrated by the CIA, and I won't be surprised if they manage to film this shit. But I urge you to watch the HBO miniseries. I urge you to watch Chernobyl 3828. And I urge you people to stay safe and to hold on to each other, as usually, and to question everything, because everyone is lying. And if you're watching the HBO series, I stumbled upon a guy who said a very nice thing, that those who think that this series is aimed at the USSR, that's a pretty narrow understanding of the subject. What they are aiming at, and I think that's probably true, they're aiming at any, any system that puts any cause, whatever noble it may be, above the human life. So any system that puts anything, ideology, politics, basic human greed, before life of fellow humans, that's the target of this series, I believe. I think they're right, because, Soviet history is not something particularly interesting for, for the West, But this particular disaster and the aftermath, that's That's a lesson that should be learned. I'm 40 minutes in. I wonder if anyone is still watching this. Anyways, watch the HBO series. Watch the videos I put in the bucket below. I thank you very much for dropping by. Thank you very much for staying with me throughout these 40 minutes. I don't think that's a pleasant talk necessarily, but I think that it must be done. Thanks a bunch, and see you people. Bye now. I'm out.